Hello everyone. I should be live. I'm just going to refresh my YouTube window to make sure. Drum roll. Chat, I am looking at you. Let me know if you can see me. Yes, there we go. Hello everyone. Sorry that I'm late. I was running on Chemi timing this afternoon. Frankly, it's because I had so many links to pull up for the show, but we're going to try and get it done in a timely fashion, he says, knowing he's probably going to go on for 2 hours. But I wanted to talk about today the UK, Yookay, and how reform is, for some inexplicable reason, morphing ineluctably into the party of the UK, that which consolidates the hideous aesthetics and anachronistic demographics of modern Britain, even if it reconfigures its constitutional architecture and twiddles the dials on economics and immigration, all of which would be very welcome changes, by the way. But again, I sit outside the Reform Party system, especially considering I've now been blacklisted from their events for my troublesome tongue, I'm sure. And this means that I can play the villain and can force the issue and can make it so that certain uncomfortable taboos which are necessary to be questioned so that we can get what we want done when they inevitably win government, as current polls suggest, that they are challenged. That we can roll the pitch for the kinds of measures that are going to be required to fix the country. And they're all sensible, they're all well within the remit of the Overton window. It's just reform lacks courage to take up these batons as it stands. So I will address super chats towards the end of the broadcast. Yesterday I tried to work Streamlabs and have alerts up, but I haven't figured out how to get the alerts working, so I'll try and do that for stream on Wednesday, where we'll be going through questions that I've already taken on various posts on YouTube Community, X and Substack, as well as your live super chats to celebrate 100,000 subscribers, and my commemorative plaque is in the post. Thank you, YouTube. Before we start talking about reform, just to understand how the Westminster media ecosystem works, I want you to look at the following post that we've got up on the left. Now, this is the Press Gazette, and the Press Gazette have an annual awards ceremony, and the Press Gazette basically navel-gazes and reports on the press themselves. And they gave awards to Hope Not Hate and Harry Shukman, and if all of you have seen, which you should have, of course, I will link in the chat if not, but my hour-and-a-half long report, The Case Against Hope Not Hate, and how Harry Shukman and Nick Lawes came by that infamous fake passport. So I hope you enjoy that. But we know that, at the very least, if the deed poll story was not just a parallel construction for how else they came by the passport, Hope Not Hate are not to be trusted on this regard, but if we're to believe the official story as printed by the Spectator, Harry Shukman used a deed poll to change his name, and then changed it back at the conclusion of gathering materials for their documentary Undercover, exposing the far right, and the series of accompanying hit pieces in The Guardian, for which they won this award. And one could question whether or not that was a incorrect use of the deed poll, despite what their lawyers insist, considering Harry Shukman was still publishing under his real name at the time and not the alias Christopher Charles Morton, and you would have to question as to whether or not he was actually going by Christopher Charles Morton to his friends and colleagues who he was not trying to entrap as subjects of Hope Not Hate's undercover stings. Also, they gave a award to Fraser Nelson, who of course dedicates his Times column to denying the migrant crime wave and insisting that people like Matt Goodwin, who are concerned about demographic change, are racialists that reform should distance themselves from. And this is the reason I've brought this up. It is these zombie institutions who are coasting off of their waning credibility that create the censorious climate in which reform still exists because they subject themselves to it. And it's because they've cleaved off before and after the election any allies to their right who have gotten the big calls on things like immigration and Islam, integration, identity, the economy correct, and instead they are still tailoring their messaging to what is acceptable to this repugnant Westminster media bubble who are patting literal communists on the back. Don't forget, twice Nigel Farage's parties have allowed Hope Not Hate to vet their candidates. Back in, I think it was 2014, Gawain Towler contacted Dan Hodges at the Mail to put him in touch with Hope Not Hate to run UKIP's candidates past their sort of state of hate dossier list to see if anyone had been a former BNP candidate or was an electoral liability, and to kick them off the shortlist. This, of course, coincided with UKIP lining up their minority candidates to take photos with Farage to prove they're not racist. And then in 2024, they deselected Bo and Dan and a few other candidates because Hope Not Hate wrote stink pieces on them. If you aren't in Hope Not Hate's State of Hate report at this point, I question your political alignment. I consider it a badge of honour. And I'm sure in the upcoming State of Hate report that I will be distinguished from Lotus Eaters this time and probably have my own subheading where all my greatest hits are listed. I'm competing with Matt Goodwin, who's got 3 pages despite him being remarkably tepid. Anyway, so the reason that we hate this media class, the reason that we hate the politicians, is the kind of world that they have created. And this media and political class have no true constituency. It's why they're all giving awards to each other. It's why the Spectator decided to put on its dog and pony show and give awards to Lord Hermer and Lucy Powell, despite Lord Hermer throwing people like Lucy Connolly in prison, who subscribes to my Substack, actually. So thank you very much, Lucy. Patriot. But also, Lucy Connolly denied the Pakistani grooming gangs to Tim Montgomery's face and said that it's a dog whistle, insinuating that any conversations about the grooming gang scandal is racist. And she was just elected as Labour's, I think she's the, what is it? Party chairman? No. She's second in command. She's not the Deputy Prime Minister because David Lammy is... She took over Angela Rayner's old job, basically. Correct me in chat, my memory's going. Anyway, so she's now in a position of seniority in the Labour Party despite denying the scandal that Labour are supposed to be clearing up. So, Starmer understands that he's on borrowed time. This might well be the last Labour government. A recent poll by Stats for Lefties put them at as low as 4 seats at the next election, because all of their natural constituencies, so the professional managerial class, they are the only ones basically voting for Labour at this point, NHS workers, public sector workers, but immigrants are breaking for their own sectarian ethnic parties, or for the Green Party, which is increasingly just the coalition of resentful foreigners saying that they want to steal white people's stuff and give it to their co-ethnics, whether they be Jewish or black or Muslim or whatever. It's just the Mamdani coalition that won in New York. And so Labour are going to be consolidated down to a couple of spattering seats in London, while their lunch is going to be eaten by independent Muslim candidates and the Green Party. Your party aren't going to get a look in because that basket case is already collapsing. People were joking that it's the People's Front of Judea versus the Judean People's Front. No, it's essentially the Democratic Socialists of America, where they're already bickering about gendered language and use of pronouns, and one of their keynote speakers at the conference that apparently sort of has anyone speak a bit like the conferences under Corbyn when he was Labour leader, was apparently expelled from the Greens for sexual impropriety towards a minor. They're not sending their best. Anyway, I've highlighted a few passages here because I thought it might make it easier for you to read what I'm actually reading in future, so this will be a feature. But in an interview with The Economist, Starmer revealed he had discussed the rise of populism and the threat to centrist parties with European leaders. Translation, the likes of AfD in Germany, led by Alice Weidel, the Farmers' Party, and the Geert Wilders Party in the Netherlands, the Freedom Party in Austria, who are probably the most likely to break through, now Bardella's National Rally. All of these are making sweeping gains across Europe because immigration is the issue. It is the friend-enemy distinguishing issue. If your civilization is being driven to extinction by replacement migration, nothing else matters, because you can recover from all sorts of other disasters so long as the people who weather that storm remain in place. But if the people disappear, there is no country anymore. There's no culture, there's no economy, there is nothing. There's just strangers living in the Ozymandian ruins of a great civilization. And so what Starmer is afraid of here is the uniparty consensus being broken down by insurgent forces that actually speak about what the people are most concerned about. And when you hear populist, it should be synonymous with democratic, but it isn't. And I recommend actually everyone read this book. Where is it? Emily Finley's Ideology of Democratism. And you all just got a Nightwing-style glute shot there. In the book, she explains how democratic governance in post-war politics is premised on the blank slate, which means that you can make, as a politician, a set of laws and policies which are hypothetically in everyone's self-interest because we have an egalitarian nature. So progressive politics that is informed by blank slate ideology is the only way to do democracy, because if everyone is the same deep down, then there is a one-size-fits-all ideological form of politics and law that can be imposed upon the civilization, rather than people capitalizing on divisions, stoking racial hatred, and all of the other monikers that are thrown out at actual populist parties, who do speak to the organic concerns of people. But the very fact that those concerns are different are proof of oppression being injected into the system, because everyone should, presuming their egalitarian nature, agree with the progressive, liberal, hegemonic uniparty. And if populist parties are succeeding, it means that misinformation or division is being spread and people are being turned against their own nature, meaning they're turned against democracy. So when they say democracy and they stigmatize phrases like populism, understand this is what they mean. They're buying fully into the blank slate and they believe that their version of doing politics is the only legitimate one. This is why they compare Donald Trump to Hitler and Farage to Putin. This is why they have the tired old fascist scare, as Eric Kaufman would say. It's because anything except egalitarian progressivism leads ineluctably to Auschwitz and gas chambers and goose-stepping. It's an absurd philosophy, but it is the post-war moral order. So hopefully you can understand this. People are saying, why are we watching this feed in mirror mode? Because otherwise I'm the other side and the screen of my screen would have to be on my right and it just looks strange. So you're going to have to, unfortunately, you're going to have to put up with mirrored book covers anytime I show you them. But for aesthetic purposes, you know, we suffer to look good here on this channel. Anyway, so Starmer says he admitted he wouldn't be able to sleep at night if Farage won the next election, but he would if Kemi Badenoch won, because he knows that Kemi Badenoch is not a threat to the post-war liberal consensus. Neither is Nigel Farage, by the way, but they have bought their own hype in believing that he is. But he knows that Kemi Badenoch, because the Conservatives have contorted themselves into the heirs to Blair and now look indistinguishable from New Labour and have elected a first-generation Yoruba immigrant Nigerian who does not challenge the British values cultural settlement that says anyone from anywhere can be as British as you and me, because Kemi Badenoch's very place in politics relies on that settlement, cooked up, of course, by Michael Gove in 2014, who is her mentor. Keir Starmer knows that Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives, as long as they are led by her, are not a threat to that settlement. They are not a, as Liz Truss was once described, human hand grenade thrown at the Blairite revolution. But they know reform has the potential to be, if not because Nigel Farage and those who surround him are sufficiently radical, but because of what reform represents. What reform represents, and this is something that Carl Benjamin has pointed out before, is a kind of English ethnic rebellion. Reform represents the discontented white working class and the aspirational Dino class who have migrated out to the outer boroughs of London and Essex, the Cockneys who have been ethnically cleansed from their ancestral lands in East London and moved out to seaside towns like Clacton, Boston and Skegness, or Great Yarmouth. I don't know if they're as far as Boston and Skegness, but towns like that on the seaside which have been dilapidated after international travel. And, of course, the North, the Red Wall. And the Red Wall are never voting Labour again, especially not after the Southport riots were responded to by Keir Starmer, rather than with sympathy, but with arresting more protesters outside asylum hotels in Rotherham than the actual Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators. So Labour is dead in the water in those constituencies, and Reform represents the white working class in revolt against the Uniparty, whether or not Reform actually wants to embrace that label, because it doesn't, because it wants to be seen as the multicultural, civic nationalist centre-right party. And I say multicultural because even though they will say, well, we're not multicultural, everyone must assimilate to British values, what they mean is all these faiths and identities can kind of coexist within the parameters of liberal pluralism. So they're just the Conservatives. in that regard. There is a cigarette paper between Zia Yusuf and David Cameron. And so it's an inadequate position that has led us to this point, which is why I'm going to continue pressing on it, much to Reform's chagrin. And I don't doubt there are going to be people in Reform HQ that probably watch this stream, because people watch my content. You know, I've had Reform staff come up and shake my hand and say, hey man, love what you're doing, even when I've been critical of Reform, because they know it's not perfect. And so sometimes, you know, your best friend is your greatest critic, even though you might not want to hear it. But hopefully, you know, I'm vindicated come 2029, and I don't need to say I told you so, and you don't need to apologise, and we're engaging in remigration heartily together. Who knows? Starmer said, if there is a Conservative government, I can sleep at night. If there was a right-wing government in the United Kingdom, that would be a different proposition. Openly admitting the Conservatives are a left-wing party. Phenomenal. Yep. Yeah, no, Starmer, keep talking. Brilliant. Brilliant. We can coax the Conservatives into not wanting to be characterised by their ostensible enemies, because there are a few Conservatives that are very anxious to rescue their party from electoral obsolescence and will basically do anything to do it, including possibly appointing an outsider as leader. Rupert, the crown is in the gutter. When asked if he saw himself as the last chance for the centre, Keir Starmer said, yes, I think this is a real test of centrist politics. I don't mean Labour versus Tories, because to some extent that's what we've had. It's a different proposition. And we have to show that politics can deliver. We also have to expose the right for what it is, because the propositions of reform would tear our country apart. Actually representing the distinct people of our isles as a constituency that warrants recognition and representation and the redress of grievances is unpalatable nativist right-wing politics, according to Keir Starmer, which makes sense because he's a fully paid up international law blank slate ideologue. So if you do want to demolish the Uniparty, pry apart the two zombies that are propping each other up, as Peter Hitchens once said before encouraging you to vote Conservative at the last election, then tactically, Reform can be that battering ram. I'm not dissuading people from voting Reform. At this point, I would withhold my vote. But I am saying that presuming Reform will serve that function, and they will win, because they are enjoying a double-digit poll lead over every other party right now. They're at 30-something%, 31 to 32%. The Conservatives float around 14 to 20%. The Greens are 18%. Labour in fourth place. I've seen Liberal Democrats higher in some polls. If Reform do serve that function, if this is the election result held in 2029 or even sooner, then attention must be paid to getting Reform in fighting and governing shape, not just promoting their ability to win the election. Now, I do think that these policies are popular, but even if they weren't popular, they are correct, and they need to be enacted in order to save the United Kingdom. But we'll get onto policies in a bit. Starmer said, an increasing number of people don't trust centrist parties to deliver, and we have to address that by delivering economic growth and improved public services. Well, you've fallen at the first hurdle there, but most people don't care about that. Most people just care about migration. They don't want to be replaced. They don't want their town full of strangers. They don't want strange, dodgy vape shops in their high streets. They don't want their children pursued home from school by sex offenders housed in asylum hotels at their expense. They don't want new safe and legal routes. They want mass deportations. They want millions of legal migrants returned to their country of origin. They basically want their country before Tony Blair. That's what most people want. They want a high-trust, homogeneous, familiar-feeling society to belong to have a home and raise children in. And all of those things are downstream from the massive demographic and cultural change that has been inflicted upon us despite our expressed wishes at every election when we said no thanks. So, the fact that he can't even address that elephant in the room, the fact that the one time he said Island of Strangers, he's now walked it back, means Keir Starmer is politically a dead man walking. To be replaced, of course, by Shabana Mahmood, who the other day appeared at the Tony Blair Institute's Christmas event and said, don't worry, I can do God, which is why Michael Gove's been promoting her so much. We'll probably get the first Muslim female Prime Minister elected by Labour in this unpopular government, just so they can say that they've done it. Starmer says, my worry is, and this is how history tells us, is that a right-wing proposition like that, with fantastical ideas leaning towards Russia, if it gets into power, it will find that its policies don't work and it will become more progressive. And won't become more progressive, it won't nudge towards the centre, it will go to the right, to the right, to the right. If only we had the government that our enemies' fevered imaginations conjured up. By the way, one of the best things that Trump can do is get the Ukraine war settled, because it takes that You're a Putin stooge, Russian propaganda, Russian collusion conspiracy, off the table. And it won't follow reform around like a cloud, and they'll, because they're boomers, won't feel the need to react to it anymore, can actually get on with controlling the messaging themselves rather than being in a defensive posture to resist it. Starmer says, we've not faced that in this country ever in this form. That's kind of a problem. Like, we don't need a retaliatory right-wing party in pre-1948 Britain. Before, socialists and race communists and Fabians and constitutional vandals ravaged our country with laws and economic reforms and mass migration. You didn't need a right-wing party to step in and fix something that wasn't broken. But now you do. And you, the vandals, are worried that the police will come knocking and the maid will come around and clean the house up, because you quite like things broken, actually. Benefits you, doesn't it? He says, the centre-right in Britain has sort of fallen away. So what is crucial is that reform doesn't replace and contort itself into that defunct centre-right. Why has the centre-right fallen away? Why has the centre fallen away? Why has Labour lost all of its natural support? Well, I think it's as much to do with the economy and the price of housing and cost of living and energy as it is with this. The aesthetics, how people feel about their country. The fact they walk down their high street and they see people they don't know and shops that they don't recognise, and that the entire world in which they inhabit feels like it changed on their doorstep without them ever being consulted. And this piece is by a magazine called Tribune. For those who don't avidly read this, like me, they were established in 1937 as a socialist magazine that would give voice to the Popular Front campaigns against the rising tide of fascism in Europe. This is a magazine that Jeremy Corbyn has written for before. So this piece is written by Maria bint Rayhan, who is a female Muslim author, and she's titled it Ukrainian Homesick Blues. And the premise is that the UK aesthetic exists, and she likes it, but in Schrodinger's fashion, when someone like Kundi Drukpa points it out on his UK aesthetics account, which you should all be following, despite it being unrelentingly blackbilling, when he points it out, with the same photos, without any commentary, it codes as critical of foreign cultures and ethnicities being in our country. And it's because, naturally, different ethnic groups and different cultures have different aesthetics and different things which feel intuitive to them. I like the singing of robins in spring. I like understated design. I like great cathedrals. I like certain music that other cultures don't like. Whereas these signs are... You can't explain why they're third world, but the tackiness of them is very third world. Anyone who's ever been to Turkey, they always, for some reason, or in certain parts of South Asia, they always need to have every single dish, a photo of it, on the sign. They need to overwhelm you with images and information and neon and colours and funky fonts like they're doing word art. And you're now seeing that in establishments in British high streets, because you've got Kurds and Afghans and Turks and Bangladeshis and Pakistanis and Iranians and Indians and all sorts of third world ethnicities coming into the country, setting up businesses, illicit or otherwise, and importing the aesthetics that are second nature to them. And it just makes it look hideous. Go down Trafalgar Square. The grand architecture of Whitehall, the Cenotaph, the Nelson's Column, you've got the House of Parliament, but in that stretch in between, you've got Britannia gift shops and stalls that are garish, blaring music, with neon lights. Nobody's in them except the staff, who are just sort of tapping away on their phones, dead-eyed behind the desk. And you wonder how all these places are propped up. Probably the same with the vape stores or the various knick-knack shops on Oxford Street. It's because they have counterfeit goods and they're money laundering fronts. And nothing is done because of the GDP, right? Anyway, this article says, it's impossible to swipe through social media apps without coming across examples of content presented as racialized dystopia. One person's home comforts is another ethnicity's racialized dystopia, turns out. We're seeing everything through a glass darkly here. And by the way, I'm going to skip over large sections of this article because I know I have a tendency to be verbose, but this is a very badly written article that over-saturates itself with £10 words when a 10p word would have sufficed. So, if I find a particularly egregious sentence, I'll read it out as an example, but otherwise, for sake of time, we'll just condense the argument. Often, she writes, it's the mere presentation of these urban sites as racially diverse cultural melting pots that's seen as self-evidently harmful. Yes, because we didn't want it to happen to our towns and cities. We will be reversing this, by the way, when these people return home. Such videos, on social media, often depict suburban outposts away from the seemingly more refined centre, where a heady mixture of slightly dishevelled chicken shops, dominated local backdrops, urbanisms, and ethnic minority communities are enough to present as totemic of civilizational decline. Of course, it is in the UK, in particular, which is held up as kind of warning, as a kind of warning to the extent of social decay that can occur through open borders, and notes that she puts open borders in parentheses as if this isn't happening. Typical of digital culture, this now familiar aesthetic has its own term, Yookay, to reflect the global weight these isles hold in this genre of contempt. In its current use, Yookay disdainfully refers specifically to black and Muslim British culture, and, she says, in its contemporary use in another digitally predictable way, is nebulously attributed to 4chan users in 2003. Peter Hitchens also claims he came up with the term. Consistent with most forms of language snobbery, which are particularly cutting in how they wield the tool of official language to malign the linguistically dispossessed, you can just tell that it's like leftist dross. Linguistically dispossessed. Translation. They moved over here and couldn't be asked to learn English. They're not linguistically dispossessed. Again, the Tower of Babel is not man's natural state. We do not all speak a universal tongue. It is not a tragedy of inequality or oppression that people have different languages and cultures. And this is not, therefore, a mandate for the Leviathan state to take more of my money and spend it on translation services so everyone has a universal access to my country and its dwindling largesse in the dialect which best suits them. Even if you learn English, most people should not be able to come here and stay here. But, at the very least, learn some English. It's completely discourteous if you don't, even if you're a tourist, right? I try and learn a little bit of Japanese when I'm going around Japan. My wife speaks Japanese, so she's basically my navigator. But even then, like, if you fumble it, people will give you some grace. You're not linguistically dispossessed just because you're too stupid to learn one of the most commonly spoken languages in the world. Anyway, the expression references another racial trope, apparently, the inarticulate outlier, this time projected on black and Muslim communities. Yes, it is an outlier if your aesthetics and your habits are incongruous with the habits and aesthetics of the native population. It's jarring to look at. These neon vape shops, these empty barbers, these various ethnic food marts, and have garish colours and photos everywhere that aren't in keeping with the aesthetic of the towns that they've been parachuted inexplicably into, and for some reason they're the only businesses opening up when everything else is shutting down. Local councils need investigating for this, by the way. The UK is nonetheless a term that acts as an acute zeitgeist of attitudes towards multiculturalism and what was once tellingly deemed British tolerance, a point of national pride. Yes, we gave an inch and you took the piss. That's basically what's happened here. We were willing to be polite and accommodating because we held ourselves to the high standards of English propriety and manners, and even with the hangover of Christianity, we treat people as ends unto themselves, as made in the image of God, and so we thought every person had dignity, and we made the naive assumption that deep down everyone wanted the same thing. It turns out they don't. Lots of people hate us, they're here to take our money, and they're going to disfigure our country beyond recognition, either out of habit or spite. So, no, it's not a point of national pride to commit demographic and cultural suicide. Sorry. From multiculturalism's very inception in the Blair era to its apparent death knell, the Boris wave, the sentiments behind derogatory coinage and the use of the term UK document the falling out of love with the multi-ethnic epicenter of a bygone empire. See, this is just painful run-on sentence. A feeling which appeared to climax in 2024's explosive race riots. Translation, they weren't race riots unless you're also considering the masked and armed Muslims who came out specifically to attack white people. They were imprudent, at times, expressions of discontent among the dispossessed white working class North, which, curiously, this leftist author seems to regard with seething contempt and subordinates them to her fellow Muslims and co-ethnics on the grounds that they were treated like second-class citizens in their own country, on the grounds that they couldn't get jobs because the majority of them were being given to immigrants, on the grounds that their children were being preyed upon sexually or murdered by men who never needed to be in the country to do said crimes in the first place. So, no, it wasn't a race riot. It was, as Martin Luther King once said, the language of the unheard. Suppose you could call them linguistically dispossessed, couldn't you, sweetheart? Anyway, the term singling out of black and Muslim communities amongst the most economically deprived in the country disproportionately claim welfare at the expense of white Brits. So, nope. Nope. Don't accept that. But it exemplifies the complexities in how we perceive the overlap of race and class. Yes, immigrants are being pitted against the working class because they occupy the housing, they take the benefits that they could otherwise claim in a high-trust society because they have no qualms about lying, cheating, and stealing to advantage themselves, their family, their clan, and the Ummah. And they also compete with them for jobs by driving down the cost of labour, therefore making it more difficult to get on the housing ladder, support your family on a single income, or even dual income these days. And, of course, the generous welfare state subsidises the fact that employers can probably pay them less because they would encourage them to take part-time wages and then also, claim welfare benefits and housing benefits and the like. It basically subsidises the costs of corporations that then replace the native population with cheap labour and also pay less because welfare benefits can offset the difference. So it's a system of perverse incentives. So, yeah, immigration is an instrument in the war against Britain's native working class. While ethnic minority communities face additional structural disadvantages on the basis of race, they literally are promoted on the basis of race. I'm sick of the gaslighting. They're also seen through a classless, vilifying lens. Yes, it is classless because foreign people will not reproduce our civilization if they are culturally distant from us. And even if they are ethnically and culturally proximate, millions of French people imported to Britain would not recreate England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. These are particular to geographic and ancestral conditions that even racially proximate people cannot replicate one for one. They might be closer. You don't have any Huguenot lobbying groups left over from the few thousand French Protestants that came over a few hundred years ago. So they, quite literally, assimilated, including into Nigel Farage's ancestry. But it's still very culturally particular to our people and our place. And so the further afield you go, the less capable they are of integrating, and the more aesthetically distinct they are, whether it's in their businesses, whether it's in their appearance, whether it's just in their cultural expression day to day. And people are allowed to say, sorry, don't like that, it's unfamiliar, didn't want it in the first place. She writes, there is a knowing, self-referential turn in the documented use of the term Yookay online. Indeed, it is unclear where the unofficial mascot for this aesthetic, the self-titled X account, stands. It's Kunle Drukpa, he's critical. On recent perusal, the account's feed includes an eclectic mix of TikTok deconstructions of white supremacy, imagery of the repeatedly referenced multilingual tube station sign, and promotional reel footage of South Asian restaurants. They are posted without comment and possess a uniquely indecipherable standing. It is entirely unclear if the curator of the account is disdainful, tongue-in-cheek, rage-baiting, or simply documenting, because to her, this is normal, this is desirable, this is actually intuitively attractive, even. To us, it is a aesthetically offensive incursion on what was otherwise the zenith of civilization. As in-group signalling for those on both ends of the divide, those whose culture it seemingly depicts and those who feel vehemently and possessively it is not their culture depicted. Because of the way Yookay is used as a catch-all term, attached to any content which depicts non-white British, working-class culture, it reinforces racist sentiment which denigrates other cultures based on them simply existing. Yes, we should be able to denigrate other cultures based on them simply existing, because we should just not like them. And unless you're saying that culture is downstream of race, which I would say it's downstream from ethnicity, because, the Albanians are pretty pasty and they don't share much in common with me, then no, it's not racist. But also, what you call racist has been linguistically inflated beyond all recognition. So you can call it racist if you like. I don't care. I don't like your culture. I don't want it here. I don't care what names you call me. It doesn't belong. And so what people are rebelling against is this aesthetic, this sort of condescending belief that if just divisions were not noticed and the billionaires stopped pushing said divisions, then we would all sing Kumbaya and live in John Lennon's Imagine. And I'm sorry, this is just not my country, it's unrecognisable, it's not wanted, and it has to be excised from our midst. So, this is the reason the UK aesthetic, the treachery of the centrist uniparty, economic privation, two-tier justice, the denial of our identity and demand that we accommodate all of its antonyms as being just as British as you and me, is why Reform is now the largest party in Britain. They have surpassed the Labour Party, who now has fewer than 250,000 members, down from 500,000 when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge. They have got 269,000. This is why Farage has declared the age of two-party politics is dead. Well, I don't think that's the case, actually. I think... Well, it might be three-party politics. You might have the resentful foreigner party with the Greens, the well-to-do middle-class luxury belief party in the Lib Dems, and then the dispossessed self-conscious natives in Reform. So it might be three-party politics, but it does show you how Labour's support base has completely collapsed under Starmer, because in February, Labour had 309,000 members. Figures shown by the Times show it's now fallen to 250,000. Labour didn't dispute the numbers when requested, so it seems that they have hemorrhaged support. They've lost their donors, and I think it was in the New Statesman, but at their conference, one of their activists and organisers was overheard saying, I think it's by Poppy Coburn, that they don't want to go doorstepping anymore because it just gets shouted at. Not shocked. Look at the state they've made of the country. And so, this is why Farage has given an interview to the Spectator and has been very clear about the sorts of things that he wants to do for the country. So he's saying we must not be the Tory Party 2.0. And my concern is that Reform is morphing not just into the refugee camp for Tory retirees, but into the UK party. And you might think that's absurd, but the number of L's they have taken in the last week or so, completely preventably, doesn't bode well. So, in this interview, Farage speaks about the £9 million donation from crypto millionaire Christopher Harbun, which is the largest donation in British political history. He's focusing on the local elections in the 7th of May 2026, and in the devolved Parliament elections where they expect to top the polls in Wales, make substantial gains in Scotland, and to drive the Conservatives to extinction in England. They're going to apparently open their own podcast channel very soon, which, excuse my pessimism, but I think it's just going to be Brexit Party TV, and as someone who has accidentally, organically built a pretty sizable platform in the last 8 months, thanks to you generous people, all of whom are watching, and there's hundreds of you that watch live every time I stream. Yesterday's stream's up to nearly 40,000 viewers, which is much appreciated. I'm going to make it a more regular thing, if it's a format that you like. But if you don't have organic, fresh faces who can just sit in front of a camera and just rattle off rhetoric and make some jokes and make it lively and presentable and fun and engaging, then it's just going to be GB News without Ofcom regulation, because they're already a revolving door of Reform's elected and unelected faces. And it is very conspicuous, by the way, because Farage in here does say that the leading figures that he has selected are Richard Taisir Youssef and Layla Cunningham. It is very conspicuous that Zia and Layla are given most of Reform's media rounds, and they are also Muslim candidates. I mean, I saw a super chat earlier that was sent in that I may as well address now, saying, what's your view on Reform having so many Muslim donors? Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Yeah, basically, lots of Muslim businessmen have realised that if you control the purse strings of a party, you control its output, and you can even leverage some of its candidate selection. And so this, coupled with the desire not to be seen as racist, and advice given by Majid Nawaz that I dispute, but he said it on Winston Marshall's show, that Nigel Farage can win the moderate Muslim vote, means that Reform are making concessions and leading themselves down quite the cul-de-sac on an issue that is going to be even more costly and prominent in years to come. If attacks like those that happened at Bondi Beach yesterday, or on Yom Kippur in Manchester in October, or consistently throughout Britain's history, Manchester Arena, Westminster Bridge, London Bridge, the Bataclan massacre and Charlie Hebdo massacre in France, the list goes on and on. If those keep happening, then the already existing 53% of the British public who don't like Islam is going to grow, and they're not going to want to vote for a Muslim candidate. And the cloud of doubt you don't want to hang over Reform's head is who's going to have the rug pulled out from them. Is it that Layla and Zia, Layla's married to a Christian, Zia is quite quietist about his faith, and, well, I think he drinks, so he's not observing every statute of Quranic morality. Anyway, are people going to go, well, are the moderate Muslims who are voting for reform thinking they have Muslim representation going to be betrayed by the fact that Islam actually doesn't have any political hold over reform and its policies, or are reform's dispossessed white working class vote body going to feel betrayed when Zia Yusuf is installed within a couple of years of reform taking government and Farage deciding that he doesn't want to be Prime Minister for all that long because he's getting on in his years and he's already got his state-funded security and his expedited trip through airports. So it's not a position you want to place yourself in. You should probably figure it out pretty quickly, but I don't think they will. Also, in here, Farage referenced the expulsion of Rupert Lowe, and he says he had to be ruthless, and he says there's one thing I prize, loyalty, not fealty. The thing about Rupert was just utter constant disloyalty and the inability to act as part of a team. Completely untrue. I'm friends with Rupert. I know Rupert's team. He allows people just complete free rein to do what he trusts their instincts will attract them towards, and therefore create a output which reflects well on something like Restore Britain. He's run family businesses. He's run football teams. You would have had loads of stories coming out, people that would have worked with Rupert, to say, oh, he's impossible to work with, he's a bully, all these sorts of things. So, and then remember, conveniently, not admitted to by Farage in here, one, there were a bunch of bullying claims about Rupert's office that evaporated, especially because Reform bungled the release of the findings by the barrister, I believe it was, that they had employed to look into this. They hadn't notified her that they were going to release the information. And also, he just completely omits the fact that Zia Yusuf called the police on Rupert Lowe and therefore would have rather him be slapped with fraudulent criminal charges than be able to say that Nigel Farage should probably build himself a shadow cabinet. Like, they would rather Rupert Lowe go to prison and he had his shotguns confiscated after his house was raided than, I don't know, threaten the inevitable succession of Zia Yusuf to Nigel Farage's throne. Terrible, pathetic, and it makes them untrustworthy. But it's not going to impact their electoral results at the moment. What will, though, and this is going through, is whether or not Reform are perceived as a retirement home for the Conservatives. Now, Farage discounts the threat by Keir Starmer. He thinks that Angela Rayner might lead the party going into 2029. He thinks that the Greens will cause more trouble than you can imagine, but it's predominantly going to be for the left. And he says it's the Tories who are his prey. Next May, you will see this historic party eliminated in Scotland, and probably, for the most part, in Wales too. In England, he says, I think they'll do terribly, far worse than this year. I said last year that our aim was to replace them, and I believe we will. And replace them he will by admitting, I think it's 22 now, prominent Conservative defectors. And that's saying nothing about the Lib Dem and Labour councillors that have come into the party, the people that have renounced their memberships from previous parties and joined the party. It's looking like Reform are not recruiting from the people outside of the existing party systems and instead are skimming the top, or not even the top, off of the previous uniparty. And again, it wouldn't matter if these defections weren't celebrated at press conferences and their respective party conferences. Nadine Dorries was wheeled out like this was a great success, that they'd poached Boris's wingwoman, who had said on Sky News that the Online Safety Act that she was pushing as Digital Media, Culture and Sports Secretary at the time could imprison Jimmy Carr for a joke. So I don't think she's someone to celebrate. But over the defectors. There's a live debate in Reform over how many defectors they should accept. 3 former Tory MPs just jumped ship: Jonathan Gullis, Chris Green, and Laia Nikki, don't know. Farage will only accept those who have the support of his activists. Well, Jonathan Gullis, who used to watch my show on Lotus Ears, by the way, so I don't want to disparage the guy, but he was just insulting Reform like not long ago and getting into a back and forth on Twitter with Richard Tice. So, you know, I don't know if he has that much support from Reform's base, if he would have polled them. But Farage predicts a new wave of Tory defectors after May. Quote, "There are 2 or 3 very senior people that we're talking to. There are 1 or 2 of the new intake that we like very much." So this will be Jack Rankin and Katie Lamb. As far as formerly senior people, Miriam Cates will be a Reform MP. Of course she will. Now, I like Miriam, even though when we've tried to organise interviews before, despite, again, watching my previous show on Lotus Eaters, she has proved difficult to nail a date down with. And I think it's because tactical reasons. There are all sorts of people that do that. Hey, you know, I've spoken to them. They're very nice. They're getting on with what they want to do. If they see me as a liability, that's fine. Again, I exist outside the system. But again, if you're just taking Tory defectors rather than making use of the existing untainted talent pool to Reform's right, it just means that they morph into the previous centrist party that caused all the problems. Not saying Miriam is to blame for that. She was very much against the grain on matters like migration and surrogacy and abortion and all sorts of family issues. Miriam is a good pickup. The rest of them, not so sure. Farage even jokes there's an office down the corridor for Shabana Mahmood. Well, wouldn't be your first prominent Muslim pickup, would it? But Farage emphasises, we must not be the Tory Party 2.0, but the Tory Party has within it a lot of people who worked at the coalface. Farage, Lee Anderson, Richard Tice, Zia Youssef haven't. We do want more of them who've been in and around number 10, which is why he's talked to Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson's chief advisor. And then it mentions Danny Kruger. Now, Danny Kruger is a personal friend of Dominic Cummings. Lots of people don't know this. It's mentioned in an interview that we'll be getting around to in a moment. But Danny Kruger shared a house with Mary Wakefield. Mary Wakefield is Dominic Cummings' wife. She's very senior, working over at The Spectator. Yet again, Spectator exists as a kind of institution around which the Tory party gravitates. Remember, Kemi Badenoch got her start at The Spectator as its digital editor. James Forsyth is a political editor over there. He's Rishi Sunak's best man. He was then Rishi Sunak's chief advisor. At Downing Street, he was married to Allegra Stratton, who was the Downing Street spokeswoman, who got sacked after the video footage was leaked to ITV about her joking about Partygate and breaking lockdown protocols in the Boris Johnson government. We've got Michael Gove, who's now, of course, the editor of The Spectator. Fraser Nelson was the previous editor, and he wrote Kemi Badenoch's speech. Charles Moore is the chairman over at The Spectator. His son works at The Spectator. Charles Moore has been pushing Kemi Badenoch at every possible turn in the likes of The Telegraph, which is about to be bought by Paul Marshall with the assistance of the Daily Mail and Redbird Capital. Redbird Capital was who sold The Spectator to Paul Marshall in the first place, so he owns that. The Spectator is this sort of institution around which all things convene. Keep it in mind very shortly, because The Spectator is where this interview is published, and it's where something else relating to reform has been published too. So Farage calls the defection of Danny Kruger very important, and he says, Kruger's focus will be, number 1, on the architecture of the way in which government's done and how it would change. Number 2, the ability to appoint your own people is absolutely crucial. That's why the first 8 months of the Trump government was a success. So he's basically talking about the Great Repeal Act, the ability to repoliticize, fire, and rehire in the civil service, to circumvent the House of Lords from blocking legislation, to stop judicial activists from thwarting their agenda. All stuff that I, but also James Orr, and even Dominic Cummings, and David Starkey have spoken about publicly and privately before. So I will say I'm very happy with this, right? I've just been trying to get the message out to make it so that it is impossible to make excuses to not do these sorts of things. And clearly, they have it as a priority. I've heard that they've had it as a priority for the time, but I've still been saying it publicly just to make the public aware of the necessity of it. And even here, Farage says, the 2 potential big barriers are the civil service and the House of Lords. They're the 2 things that Danny is wrestling with more than anything else. And he says that you have to have one great, big, beautiful bill, so beautiful, impersonating President Trump, in order to amend, repeal, replace bits of legislation like the Human Rights Act, and that's what you have to do on day 1. So he's aware of what has to happen. All very encouraging. But electoral mandate and legislation is all well and good. But if you don't have the personnel to implement it, if you're comprised of mainly Tory defectors and insufficient candidates, then how do you get it passed? How do you ensure that your party doesn't just become like the Conservative Party, full of striving ethno-nepotistic diversity hires, who will then use your ostensible right-wing party as a vehicle to advance their own careers and import more of their co-ethnics from the subcontinent? And so it's very worrying that Reform have appointed this chap as a councillor candidate for Central South Sea in Portsmouth. Now, lots of people say, our campaigner, oh no, he is very much a candidate. He is running as a candidate in Portsmouth for Reform UK. UK, of course, spelled Y-O-O-K-A-Y. Why are they doing this? Who does this man represent? You? Me? Yeah, I know. Lots of people in the chat probably haven't seen this before. They're shocked. This is a Reform candidate. And it has been clarified. So this is Councillor George Madgwick. He is the leader of Portsmouth Reform UK group and is an elected councillor. He is the one promoting this and defending it. He wrote, Adi, originally from Bangladesh, is ready to stand up for his community. Which community? The local community? Because is he representative of the people in Central South Sea? Or is it his community in the sectarian ethnic sense? And I presume that Mo is short for Muhammad, just like Muhammad is Zia Yusuf's real first name. And so is he a Muslim? Does this represent the majority of Reform's voter base? He says, this is the kind of migration we want. No, it isn't. Nope. We don't want third world migration. We don't want Muslim migration. Even if it's practiced peacefully, it does not recreate the culture and the civilization that we wanted to inherit as young people and want to pass off onto our own children. Madrick says, people who pay to come here. My country is not an economic zone, a job centre, or a sports team. You can't just swap out the members no matter how much the trade brings into the treasury. People who are educated, people who work full-time, people who pay taxes, people who integrate, and people who want to help their community. Okay, people who integrate. What does integration mean here? Paying taxes and not breaking the law. Lowest possible bar. Because, again, he might well be a very nice chap interpersonally. I don't know the guy, so I don't want to personally disparage him. I don't want to seem cruel. Again, I still hold myself to standards of English propriety and politeness. I'm nice to everyone I meet, as long as they're nice to me in kind. But this doesn't make him an Englishman. It does not mean that if left to his own devices, he will improve or even reproduce our culture and our country. And so, what does integration mean here? Is it just being a seamless cog to fit into the GDP generation machine? Because if so, this is a very thin concept of what a country is from Reform. He says, and this is the most absurd part, I'm fully aware Adi plans to return back to his homeland one day. Okay, so Britain isn't his homeland. At least he's honest about it. I'm sure Steve Laws will be keen to assist him. So what is he doing in our politics? Is it that he is desperate to represent his constituency, Central South Sea of Portsmouth? Or is it that he, like lots of people in that region, are strivers who just wants to add this to his LinkedIn and increase his ISAT by occupying a place of political responsibility in a foreign country? Like, why should we be bolstering the CVs at the expense of the British taxpayer of random men from the Indian subcontinent? He says, one of the things he said about Reform is he loves how patriotic they are and prioritises British people and wants to help. Okay, then why are you occupying the space that the British person could otherwise have occupied if Reform would have selected them as candidates? It's not very patriotic of you, as a guest, to demand say over the household finances. He says, we also have a number of Polish and Estonian campaigners in our local branch. Are they a problem too? No, if they are friendly co-belligerents, but they should not be holding elected positions. George. What we don't want is people travelling over illegally, claiming off the benefit system and committing crimes. Those are the people we need zero tolerance on and to deport. Okay, we should also shut the borders from anyone else. Pretty much anyone else. Because we are full to bursting, and, sorry, this chap just... he's not going to produce England, is he? Sorry. And so, people have responded. We don't want him in the country. And he says, yes, we do. He came over on a student visa. Right, so, as I pointed out here, he's a Boris Wave, Bangladeshi migrant who arrived on a student visa, which expires soon. He wants to move to the Middle East. This is something that was said in one of the replies. He doesn't even want to stay here. He wants to go and work in the Middle East. He plans to return to Bangladesh. And he's only eligible to vote and stand in elections because of 3 pieces of legislation. That's the 1948 British Nationality Act, which was then entrenched with just the birthright citizenship part repealed by the British Nationality Act of 1981 under Margaret Thatcher, and the Representation of the People Act 1983, which allows Commonwealth citizens, so Indians, Pakistanis, Nigerians, Bangladeshis, to stand in local council elections and to vote in our national elections. So if you're an Indian, you can just come over to Britain and vote for the Prime Minister. Yeah, that's not a system of perverse incentives whatsoever. This is why Rishi Sunak advocated for bringing more Indians over in 2014 as part of his policy exchange report before he was an MP, saying that Indians, more than any other diaspora, are likely to vote Conservative, and you don't need to give them citizenship in order for them to vote, because they can vote as part of the Nationality Act and the Representation of the People Act. So because of these pieces of antiquated legislation, yeah, this guy can now be a candidate. Now, Reform have defended this, by the way, after people expressed confusion as to whether or not he was a councillor or a candidate. And we know he was a candidate because he announced on his own social media that he would be a candidate in Bengali. He's integrated. He's representative. He's as British as you and me, because I write all my Facebook posts in Bengali. Anyway, so he came on a student visa, according to his Facebook profile, studied a master's in electronic and electrical engineering at the University of Portsmouth. May well be a very intelligent chap, shouldn't be allowed to be an elected councillor. He told the BBC he was proud to call Portsmouth his home, and as a legal resident he had worked hard to build a life here. Right, but he's going to uproot that life and go to the Middle East, because the taxes and the pay is better, and then go back home to Bangladesh eventually. So no, you actually haven't worked hard to build a life here. You're just a foreign mercenary. Sorry, you just don't get to represent me, no matter how nice or educated you are. This is Madgwick. He answered many of the comments and said, again, this is the kind of migration we want. Madgwick says he believes the selection reaffirms the party is the antidote to the far right. Remember when Keir Starmer said, the centre is dying, we must do all we can to thwart the right? Reform are becoming, whether consciously or not, the here and no further cry of the establishment. So the establishment is making rhetorical and some policy concessions to the rising, let's say nativist, for want of a better term, right in Britain. The self-conscious English who recognise that the UK is unfamiliar to them and unwanted, that they have had millions of unwanted strangers imposed upon them at great cost, committing crimes, who will not reproduce their civilization, and that there is an us and them dichotomy, and we should own our own country, and they should leave. And what Reform is saying is, well, hang on a minute. What if we all became us under the rubric of British values, you know, paying taxes and not breaking the law, and we just got rid of the lawbreakers, and we then appoint immigrants as our candidates to show that we're not racist and that we can still, sectarian fashion, represent immigrant constituencies. Is that a fair settlement? I don't think it is. I don't think it goes far enough. I don't think it addresses the core complaints of Reform's own voter base. I think it fundamentally misunderstands politics at the moment. And so this is why some people in Reform did come out and defend this, and it was tone deaf. Now, the reason I brought this tweet up is because previously I was suspicious of Nick. I met Nick last week, and we, in truly male fashion, we basically did the Tucker Carlson Nick Fuentes interaction where we were like, I thought you were a Fed. I thought you were a Fed. Like, he thought I was a Nazi. I thought he was a party plant. We both realised we weren't as bad as we think. We're actually both big Batman fans, and he's actually quite a sincere guy, and he is a spurg. So I think he can be one round. Anyway, we've given him a hard time, but he's just got it incorrect here. And so the reason I brought this up is because I want to explain. Is because you don't have an automatic right in most other countries as an immigrant to come into the country and be elected to hold power and influence over the native population. This isn't a thing that ostensibly happens in India, for example. You can be a naturalized Indian citizen and hold office, but you can't if you are a foreign citizen, as this guy is. He's on a student visa. He's not even got a British passport. You can't in Pakistan unless you were, you're ethnically Pakistani, you were born in Pakistan, you're a Muslim. In most other countries, you can't do this, and we should hold that standard. And I'm sorry, but there's no evidence that he's doing a great job. Again, he might be a nice guy if he supports the native population having ownership over their own country. Then that is welcome as a co-belligerent. But then occupying a space that could otherwise be taken by a member of that population is displacing that population. So this should not be allowed. And it's not his skin colour. It's the fact that he's a Bangladeshi here on a student visa who, other than attending university and paying tax, doesn't seem to share much of the cultural priors that have produced our country. And it is absurd to have foreigners rule over the natives as an axiom. And so this is the critique that my friend Charlie Downs said. What is the point of Reform UK if not to reassert the right of the British people to sovereignty over their own homeland? It increasingly looks more interested in saving the current dismal order than overturning it. Their slogan may well as be, hence the title of this stream, Real UK has never been tried. I don't think Reform UK should be dedicated to making sustainable the political order that has betrayed people and inflicted unwanted demographic change, economic impoverishment, and the UK aesthetic on them. And at the moment, they are still making concessions to that antiquated order, even if they are promising to reconfigure Britain's constitutional settlement and make inroads via mass deportations and cancelling indefinite leave to remain of the Boris wave. But they're still not committed to punitive social policies that would encourage unassimilable migrants to return home of their own accord, to self-deport. When they're not there yet and they need pressing on it, and they won't get there if they fill their party with Tory traitors and Bangladeshi students. And they won't get there if they continue to fill their party with candidates like this. So here is Raj Forhad, who was previously mentioned. Now, Raj Forhad himself is a previous local election candidate, and he is a Bangladeshi. And we know he's Bangladeshi because he attended Bangladeshi Nationalist Party rallies in London in 2023. So about a year before he ran for Reform UK to demand the resignation of the illegitimate Prime Minister, who I think is Tulip Siddique's aunt. So again, politics of the subcontinent just playing out with Reform candidates. And it's because Reform are top of the polls. And because they have a permissive candidate selection structure that allows these grifting strivers to enter despite not adequately representing Reform's voter base. They ride the coattails of a popular movement. Why does he follow me? A patriot, I guess? And also, there was another candidate in here that The Guardian profiled. And again, if you're a Reform candidate getting profiles by The Guardian, you should probably question it. This is Neville Watson. So Neville Watson comes from a Caribbean family. And he says, it's about space, not race. He, Jamaican. He says, I have the values of my family, who put so much in, have always stood for, hard work and aspiration. But he personally supports economic reparations for the unimaginable wrong of slavery. So he says, there's deep-rooted and sometimes subconscious racism in white people, and white people should pay slavery reparations to black people. And he has been a Reform candidate and was chair of Reform's Enfield branch. Now, he says the reason that Reform represents him is because it gives room for his Christian faith. Though, his mind changed because he's actually quit. Yeah, he quit back in October. And he said, the growing influence of Christian nationalism scared him off of Reform. Reform being a Christian nationalist party is not correct. And he cites Tommy Robinson for this, which Tommy is not part of Reform, he's part of Advance UK. He's been denounced repeatedly by Nigel Farage. He's threatened to sue Farage if Farage doesn't retract the erroneous statement he made that Robinson has a conviction for violence against women. So it's just that, generally speaking, the right has basically ho-scared him, and so he's now going to defect towards the left. And this frequently happens. Harrison Pitt's pointed this out before. What would usually happen is, out of a fear of not wanting to be seen as racist, the likes of UKIP or the Brexit Party or now Reform would embrace an ethnic minority or Muslim candidate. And they would propel them to the front of the party. They would use them in party branding and ad campaigns. And then, when inevitably there would be a difference of opinion or just an interpersonal fallout, because there are big personalities in UK politics. A lot of my time in the last year has just been dedicated to babysitting the egos of men 2 to 3 times my age. But when that fallout inevitably happens, the crash out would then tinge with resentment and accusations of racism. You would then get the insinuation from those candidates that the party they left had been racist. And this actually came up when Zia Yusuf left the party in a huff, accusing Sarah Pochin of being dumb and insinuating to, I think it was Andrew Pearce in the Mail, that he was going to bring lots of Muslim donors and candidates into Reform, but he couldn't now because the party was racist. So the accusation of racism is permanently held like a gun to the head of Reform, and so they feel the need to appoint inadequate candidates, Bangladeshi students, and turn the career ladder into an elevator for the likes of Zia Yusuf. So this is just not a... And this guy is self-selected out, but, you know, the fact that he passed the smell test in the first place isn't encouraging for Reform. This is not an encouraging trend for Reform. And so this is why the likes of this Bangladeshi student should be barred from being a candidate. This is why Restore Britain are now engaging in a research endeavour to find out just how many foreign nationals are standing as candidates across our country. We just had, in Tower Hamlets, Bangladeshis as sitting councillors running for the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party to be MPs back in Bangladesh. And this is why, when the likes of Sundar Katwala, the state-funded Fabian socialist who pushes anti-white propaganda all the time, complains that I said on my interview with Harry Cole, which you should go and watch, by the way, I'll drop it in the chat. It was a sort of a proper interesting moment where the online sphere crossed over with the mainstream, because he works for The Sun. But he was complaining that I had said that there shouldn't be foreign nationals able to vote in our elections. There shouldn't be people who are not ethnically indigenous Brits able to not just be elected to local councils, but also to Parliament or employed by the civil service. No, they shouldn't be in a position of privilege regarding state secrets or power over the natives, and that we shouldn't give quarter to any religion other than Christianity. Denominations may vary in our government or in public life. And he threw his toys out the pram and said, there's not even much of an audience. I mean, the viewing figures have since doubled since he complained about it. But nobody cares about this guy. Like, he's got a fair amount of followers and a lot of government funding, but nobody actually likes this, whereas, again, I've sort of ratioed him into the dirt. And he's, again, screaming and complaining and crying about this. But we should hold the line on this. We are correct. People of other extractions do not substantively represent us. Other countries have this standard, and we are right to want to enforce it. And so, regarding whether or not it is prudent for Reform to appoint these candidates, okay, there's just one or two bad candidates. It's just one or two bad spokespeople. This is something we can clear up. Maybe Reform will put those pieces of legislation in the big, beautiful bill on day one. Did you know what else isn't very encouraging? And I actually, as a matter of principle, I didn't want to put her in the thumbnail. The fact that your average Reform supporter is now Bonnie Blue. If people didn't see this, it was covered on Lotus Eaters, by the way, by Carl, Nick, and Bo in an excellent segment you should watch. But the Spectator decided to publish in their magazine, in their Christmas edition, alongside a message from the deceased Queen Elizabeth II, an article from infamous prostitute Bonnie Blue. Now, I don't like to speak about this particular harlot because the sex acts that she performs that would make your average Roman empress blush, with immigrants hanging out of every orifice, is a demoralizing psyop that seems to me designed to give white blonde women an international bad standing. To present to men from the third world the prospect that they are just desperate to mate and procreate with them. Because disproportionately, those demographics consume a lot of porn depicting white European women, and they come to our country with the expectation that they will be given wives and concubines falling at their feet. This is why Hadush Kabatu propositioned a 14-year-old schoolgirl. This is the excuse often given by the Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators. This is the false impression that low IQ, low impulse control third worlders have when they come to our country, having had marketed to them by people smuggling gangs, as I helped reveal on Lotus Eaters and GB News in 2023, footage of white women filmed without their consent, with images of interracial relationships, alongside footage of them crossing the channel in dinghies and burning down churches. Men are enticed to come to Europe with the idea that women, like Bonnie Blue, will want to sleep with them. And the Spectator thought it was a great idea to platform Bonnie Blue for her endorsement of Nigel Farage on reform. Now, this is a really badly written article. Of course, I don't think whores are going to be the next Shakespeare, so I'm not particularly shocked that it's not linguistically complex or even coherent. But she says, I'm not knowledgeable about politics. Knock me down with a feather. But I do know the UK is very messed up. The tax system is terrible, and it's smart to leave if you have money. You shouldn't have to pay any inheritance tax, as you've already been taxed on that money. Reform has sensible positions on immigration and inheritance tax, so I stand with Nigel Farage. Last thing I want to do is read about Bonnie Blue's positions. I've also seen people online post the allegation that Nigel Farage was recently at a black tie event, and Bonnie Blue's father took a selfie with him. I know that Lily Phillips's parents manage her OnlyFans, so they literally pimp out their own daughter, and she performs similar audacious sex acts, though an order of magnitude 10 times less of that of Bonnie Blue. I think she slept with 100 men in a day. Bonnie Blue did 1,000 in 12 hours. She's got arrested in Bali and banned from the country because she was driving around in a bus having sex with random men. I actually feel ill talking about this. But for some reason, the people at the Spectator thought this was a great idea to platform. Now, you know what I'm going to mention. And I'm going to mention it not just because it's my personal crusade to get the footage released, but because it's an interesting contrast. Bear in mind, the Spectator thought it was a great idea to publish Bonnie Blue, an essay from a notorious prostitute who is giving women the international reputation of wanting to be preyed upon by foreign men. And again, if you don't believe me, the Daily Mail have published an updated story on this just last week, where Indians in the UK are filming women in random man-on-the-street TikToks and pretending that they are flirting with them, that they've got the riz, as the kids would say, and that white women are just waiting for these men to come over and sleep with them. And yet again, it's the same strategy as all the people trafficking gangs have been using, just filming women without their consent and showing it as advertisements for either people on student visas, which is why student visas to the Indian subcontinent is not something to be celebrated, Reform UK, or illegal immigrants who will pay people smugglers to move them across, just have an entire country of white women waiting for them. Where do you think they get the impression that white women really want to sleep with foreign men? Could it be that Bonnie Blue, who jokes about the queue of foreign men waiting to have sex with her one after the other and says it's very British? Actually, I don't think it is. I think it was very British of the Victorians to crack down on prostitution for public health reasons, and I think you should probably be confined to an insane asylum for your and the public good. But where do you think they get this impression from? Could it be the queue of Asians and Africans just waiting for their turn on Bonnie Blue like she's Piers Morgan's wife? And, you know, all credit to Nicholas Lizak, who just said, not to gatekeep, but no, we don't want to. Patriot. Good man. We can win you over eventually, Nick. You're one of our guys. But what this represents, the Spectator, the reason I've been raising it, is the Spectator thought I was beyond the pale. Me saying that the likes of Mr. Addy should not be able to stand as a reform councillor was worth censoring, suppressing, and in correspondence that I can't show you nor relay to you, they accused me of, by trying to get the footage released with the assistance of the Bad Law Project, of trying to attack free speech itself. And this was the reason why any potential exploration of using legal means to procure the footage has gone stone dead. The only recourse I have is filing a subject access request to at least get my video and audio, because that's featuring me. Whether or not they'll try and block that, we'll see. I'll have to escalate the subject access request if that's the case. Or if some disgruntled Spectator employee decides to leak it to an anon, which would be wonderful, because I think people would enjoy it. But, again, Spectator thought I was beyond the pale. I was unacceptable. I was too radical. I said something in there that offended their sensibilities. And I say Spectator, I mean Freddie Sayers, by the way, who is the head of OQS Media. Because I heard from a very reliable source that it wasn't actually Michael Gove who culled this, that Gove, despite taking a bit of a rhetorical kicking from me and even Catherine Burblesing at points, genuinely wanted to release it. And for that, you know what? Fair enough. Fair play. If that is the case, respect. Correct? Now, I think he should go rogue and just publish it anyway, and have the debate with Paul Marshall as to whether or not Freddie Sayers' editorial line over at Unherd and The Spectator is in the best interests of OQS Media. But I heard from a very reliable source that Freddie Sayers was the one who killed it. He's also the reason that I'm banned from Unherd's premises. He's also the reason I've been bad-mouthed, but there you go. But clearly, Freddie Sayers, signing off on The Spectator's output, if Gove is asleep at the wheel, thought that Bonnie Blue was worth platforming. Bonnie Blue. Notorious prostitute who can't write. Bonnie Blue's endorsement of Nigel Farage was worth including in The Spectator's Christmas edition alongside the late Her Majesty the Queen. But me, no. I am so radioactive that despite my sizable audience and frequently getting more viewers than Unherd's output, despite my legitimate published journalism, I deserve to be censored, suppressed, insulted, and banned from not just every outlet, but also the very physical premises of the Unherd Club. If I could have a cordon sanitaire placed on me for the postcode of SW1, I'm sure that he would pursue it. So just realise that this is the containment operation that's being run. The Spectator, which sits at the centre of the Marshall media empire, thinks that Bonnie Blue is acceptable, but I am not. And so I just reiterate this so you understand what is going on here, what you are allowed to see. And they're doing this, by the way, at the expense of the profitability of their business, because guarantee that subscriptions were cancelled over this. I know for a fact they were cancelled over censoring me, but I don't imagine a lot of the social conservatives who had subscribed to The Spectator to read people like Douglas Murray, who is still their most read columnist, were expecting to find Bonnie Blue in their Christmas edition. And I guarantee the subscriptions have sank from this. So they are doing this for ideological reasons, at the expense of their own reputation and profitability. And they're willing to take on the negative PR of censoring me and of Bonnie Blue to push some sort of contorted ideological line, at the expense of the international safety of white British women who are being preyed upon by migrants. Could it sink any lower? As Charlotte Gill pointed out in this excellent tweet, Bonnie Blue being given a Spectator column just reinforces the idea that young people can do tacky things and get rewarded for it, whereas young people who work hard don't get these breaks. Hello. It's leading to this grim, mizzy economy of attention-seeking being vile to get ahead. It's leading to people exploiting the perverse incentives of the UK. I don't think anyone actually sums up the UK better, any two people, than Mizzy and Bonnie Blue. Which means probably Mizzy will be a Reform MP safe seat candidate by nightfall, at this rate. Now, you might say, oh, Connor, come on, you're over-exaggerating. The Spectator probably published that endorsement of Bonnie Blue to poison the well against Reform, right? Because I remember Milo Yiannopoulos said that he had advised Nick Fuentes when Nick was asking how can he damage the Trump campaign because they were insufficiently tough on the Israel issue because Trump was softening on migration. So he sought to leverage his audience against him, you know, kind of like how we need to do for Reform. And Milo had said, if you want to damage Trump, endorse him, which Nick ultimately didn't do. But maybe The Spectator, considering they're controlled by Paul Marshall and led by Michael Gove, who really want Kemi Badenoch to be Prime Minister, their output is overseen by Freddie Sayers, who is an arch-liberal, obsessed, for some reason, despite being a gay man, with promoting mass migration, which would put him at risk. But he is a true believer in liberal pluralism. Perhaps they published this piece to sabotage Reform, right? So Reform would then have to embarrassingly distance himself from this headline. Yeah. Then Reform embraced Bonnie Blue. Today. I'm so glad, actually, that I delayed this stream until today, because I couldn't have predicted this. I couldn't have predicted Danny Kruger, the so-called Christian MP, accepting the Bonnie Blue endorsement. I'm going to play you this clip from their press conference today, just so you can believe it, just so you can hear.
On Bonnie Blue, I mean, listen, we'll take votes wherever we can get them. We want all the support we can get, quite like Bonnie Blue. But we're not going to be fussy about that. But listen, I'm not going to be judgmental about people who want to vote Reform. Good for them if they will.
So Tommy Robinson, too far for Reform, saying we don't want him in our party. Tommy Robinson's never done anything as bad as Bonnie Blue. But Christian, evangelical, Danny Kruger, says he doesn't want to judge Bonnie Blue, and that he actually embraces the fact that she wants to vote Reform. Me, banned from Reform's events, too far. Bonnie Blue, A-OK. Accept her endorsement. Hey, why doesn't she do, like, a scene with 2,000 men while she's wearing one of Reform's black and gold football t-shirts? Maybe it can even be signed by Farage. Maybe Richard Tice can join the queue. I mean, what the fuck is going on? Who the fuck is doing this? Who? I understand Kruger's trying to make a joke out of this, but if you think that Reform are going to win the young male vote while estranging young men that they watch and embracing Bonnie Blue, who is basically the British avatar of the porn industry that's preyed on them since they were 10 years old, while also creating a culture which puts women in the crosshairs of migrant sex criminals. If you think the young guys are going to like that, you are deluded. So I actually responded to this. I don't know. Pete North said the party's led by vacuous prostitutes, so you can't complain if like attracts like. Look, it was funny, I liked it. It's all banter here, ladies and gentlemen. But I put this out, and someone asked, I think this is just an overreaction, and I have my fair share of Reform criticisms. What's Danny supposed to say? Don't vote for us, you whore? Yeah. Yeah, he is. He would actually gain respect for that. You know what Reform should do? Much to the consternation of my critics in Pimlico Journal, I'm sure. And they wrote another piece on me, which was not very substantive and just had loads of insults and accused me of being a crypto-Muslim and not actually a Christian, which, sorry guys, that's just kind of bad faith. I've not engaged with you on such terms, there's no need to do that, but hey, it's your prerogative. Anyway, as much as it would annoy the Pimlico Journal, they should just come out and say, yeah, the porn industry has consistently preyed upon children. We've caught them doing it. OnlyFans, for example, is headquartered in the UK. So yeah, we are going to ban them. We're going to prosecute any porn company headquartered in the United Kingdom that has provably, like OnlyFans, allowed children to access the platform, to upload content on the platform, and has not removed it. Because that is breaking the law, and the law just isn't being enforced. And you know what? People would support that. That's an entirely reasonable position. That is actually an even more reasonable position than the likes of the Online Safety Act, which pretends to protect children from pornography and predatory social media content, but is actually just about censoring speech and age-gating my Substack for some reason. Because reform could then thread the needle of being against online censorship of speech, but also against harmful pornography being shown to children. But you don't get to do that if you say, yeah, we'll embrace Britain's most famous prostitute as one of our supporters. What's she going to be? Fucking Treasury Minister? Actually, to be fair, the people in the last Conservative government probably had similar sexual escapades during the candidate selection process, so hey, if they're a Tory refugee camp, Bonnie Blue would fit right in. Now, if you're wondering why Danny Kruger has done this, there's a very long interview here in The Guardian, which reveals, among other things, that his mum is the presenter of Great British Bake Off, which I didn't realise. But in here, Kruger says some very mixed things, but he says about his Christianity that I think that socialism is in heaven. The problem with socialists is they don't accept the fall of man. They try to create heaven on earth with the assumption that if we somehow just got our institutions or culture right, we could be synonymous beings and all behave nicely to each other. Okay? Perfectly fine. Heaven is a socialist state. The efforts of socialists is to bring heaven on earth with the state in the position of God. That is not a good idea. That's because no state of human beings can be all good or all powerful. See, he's capable of speaking like this, and this is the kind of Christianity you want to see represented in public life, but then feels the need to be quietist on actually morally judging people. And that doesn't get anywhere. Like, he's also, by the way, a full-throated defender of the State of Israel. He represented in an Unherd debate not so long ago the pro-conservative Israel position. But during the Now in England conference, he said that anyone can learn to be English, much like Robert Toombs. So, again, very interested in the territorial integrity of of Israel as a state to preserve the ethnic Jewish people, but doesn't apply that same standard to Britain. And I just want that same standard applied. I'm not even bashing Israel in this sense. We can relitigate our differences on foreign policy later. I would just like the same interest in preserving the people of Israel for England by politicians who are elected to represent the English. He also says some weird things in here, saying like Naz Shah is his good friend and a brilliant MP, and he dedicated his Spectator Award for Speechmaker of the Year to her. Naz Shah is the MP for Bradford West who in 2017 retweeted an Owen Jones parody account and liked it, which said, if you don't remember, those abused girls in Rotherham need to shut their mouths for the good of diversity. And she still insists she's the victim of that, by the way. How do you accidentally like and retweet something that says that? So, I wouldn't make friends with that person. Anyway, the reason that I'm raising this is because, as mentioned here, not just him about feeling uncomfortable about having seen porn and not wanting to talk about it, which would then perhaps explain his embrace of Bonnie Blue, but noted here, he shared a house with journalist Mary Wakefield in his 20s, and then to the subject of her husband, Dominic Cummings. He tells me Cummings has had a couple of dinners with Farage. Again, Mary Wakefield works for The Spectator. Bonnie Blue's endorsement, published by The Spectator. Nigel Farage, giving lots of interviews to The Spectator. There's this sort of Gove, Freddie Sayers, Marshall network that is very influential and is clearly trying to leverage itself upon reform and shape it in all sorts of ways. And even, let's say, Danny Kruger doesn't agree with the goals of that particular cohort. I mean, he was with Marshall at a barbecue with James Orr and J.D. Vance when Vance was visiting in the Cotswolds. So, again, seems to be part of that network. But let's say he doesn't agree with them, then why would he embrace the Bonnie Blue endorsement even ironically? It just seems like a total blunder here. And again, this is one of the Tory defectors. This is the high-profile Tory defector that Farage has touted, and when he's giving a press conference, he makes a total blunder by embracing a prostitute. This just seems like again, a completely unavoidable misstep where reform seem to be embracing the downwardly mobile morals and aesthetics of the UK, filling their party with people that are content with the status quo. And more Tory defectors, by the way. So this is Jonathan Gullis, who, again, mentioned previously, had denigrated reform. Ben Bradley, they've just taken in the former leader of Nottinghamshire County Council. He's an MP. He lost his parliamentary seat in the last election. They've just taken a Scottish Conservative life peer who had previously given £150,000 to the Conservative Party. They're just filling up with former Conservatives who, until only yesterday, were all too content to stand by the Boris wave and defend it. Not great. Again, they might be perfectly nice people, but are these the people that we can trust to fix the problems that they made? I don't think so. So reform is being represented by Bangladeshi students, Bonnie Blue, and yesterday's Tories. Your right-wing populist revolt, sir. I mean, it's just not good enough, I'm afraid. So then, let's quickly wrap up so that it doesn't drag on too long. Let's go back to the Christianity point, because we all remember this particular article, right, that we covered a few weeks ago about whether or not reform is going to Christian. Well, after this, reform has created a Christian fellowship. Now, this has been established by yet another Tory defector, Tim Montgomery. And again, I don't wish to be insulting to these people because I've met Tim, we've conversed, we've debated. Tim is reassessing his stance on Islam in the light of recent terror attacks, so hopefully he hardens his position somewhat. But Tim Montgomery is the honorary president because he co-founded the Conservative Christian Fellowship back in 1990. They've had their launch event. They had a carol service with Sarah Pochin, who, again, I don't mind admitting, I was wrong about, because I was concerned that while I think she was a Conservative mayor, she held refugee welcome events for Afghans and spoke at a Pride event with drag queens. And then since she's come in as a Reform MP, she's been a hardliner on immigration, she's called to ban the burqa, and she says she's sick to death of interracial relationships being overrepresented in adverts. Based? Thank you. So she's actually pretty good. And she's also been working with Rupert Lowe quite a lot, despite, of course, her party basically banning any interaction with the man. So she seems like a principled person, and she's trying to do her best. So I'm glad that Sarah Pochin is involved in the Christian Fellowship. However, yet again, a bit like Danny Kruger, being unwilling to judge Britain's most famous prostitute and reject a damaging endorsement, Tim Montgomery isn't exactly the hardest line Christian in the world. So this was in 2012, back when the Tory government was pushing for the recognition of same-sex marriage and placing a lot of pressure on the Anglican Church as an extension of the government, because of course it's intertwined via the House of Lords and the Crown, to accept same-sex unions. And in an interview with The Independent, Tim Montgomery said that marriage is probably the most important conservative institution, and excluding people from it is therefore excluding people from conservatism to a significant extent. Completely incorrect. And I would wonder if, almost 14 years after that decision, the treatment of men and women as indistinguishable in law that then laid the ideological tracks towards the trans madness, I wonder if Tim Montgomery would reassess his position here. He hasn't provided any clarification. I did tweet it out and I didn't receive a response. That's fine. He can work that out in his own time. But I wouldn't expect reform to be particularly consistent with biblical doctrine on marriage being only between a man and a woman and incapable of being torn asunder because God has brought it together. I wouldn't expect them to, not only because, I mean, they're Anglicans and evangelicals, not Catholics, but also because David Bull, a gay man who thinks that transgender identifying individuals should be in the prison corresponding to the sex that they identify with, not their actual birth sex, I don't think they're going to take very strong stances on sexual morality. Despite, yet again, this being representative among the right-wing young men that they want to court as a voter base, and that they want to go to their university campus events. By the way, it's very conspicuous, I must say, that Reform's UK university campus events are spearheaded by a Portuguese immigrant, who again seems like a really nice guy, so I don't wish to attack him personally. But, again, allowing immigrants to lead the anti-immigration party, did you not see how this capsized the Conservatives, guys? And also, most of its speaking engagements are now being conducted by Jack Anderton, who is a anti-immigration TikToker and is gay. And I've had one interaction with Jack Anderton. No, I've had two. I invited him on Lotus Eaters back in the day when his TikToks were getting popular and he declined. That's his prerogative. But then I was at an event, a sort of closed-door conversation with Jack Anderton. I think it was last year. And I had, when asked my perspective on current politics, it was Chatham House rules, but I'll disclose what I said. I had predicted, that Reform UK's base would have a wedge driven between it on the issue of Tommy Robinson, because even though Nigel Farage doesn't like Tommy Robinson, Reform UK are trying to do their best not to be perceived as far right. One, Robinson's reputation will eventually be rehabilitated, he'll be vindicated as being right on the grooming gangs, which then exploded to be the predominant story this year. But also, even if the Reform leadership don't like him, this is back when Richard Tice was calling attendees of the Unite the Kingdom rally that lot. One, people will grow in number attending that rally, and it will be a significant share of Reform's voter base. And two, they won't abandon Robinson, because the people attacking Reform over Robinson, who will use Robinson to drive a wedge between the base, they have no moral legitimacy. They've excused all the atrocities that mass migration has visited upon us that Tommy Robinson was warning about. And so, if Reform denounce Robinson, they'll be denouncing their own base to appease the media that hate them anyway. And Jack thought that I was overstating my own importance, and that I was worried about nothing, basically. Let's sum that up. When, actually, I think I was correct on that particular issue. I did also predict the ousting of Rupert Lowe eventually, and said that the ousting of Ben Habib was a problem back in my article in The Critic on the 30th of November that Richard Tice called garbage twice. Well, call me Cassandra, I suppose. And so it's very interesting that figures like Charlie Downs, figures like the Grant sisters, have not been enlisted in these Reform campus tours, but yet again, an in-house influencer employed by Reform UK head office, who is gay, is who? Their answer to Charlie Kirk? The staffing decisions are inadequate, and this is a grave concern for the insurgent populist party that's meant to be improving Britain. Now, I'm mentioning the Christian fellowship point just to put a capstone on this, because this is the only acceptable form of Christianity in political discourse. And this has been set up after this Is Reform Going to Christian article by Sam Rubenstein, which we covered on the previous stream. But I just want you to note that, again, Unherd, the Spectator, have the same parent company, OQS Media, supervised by Freddie Sayers, so he controls all the output. So, just to recap, Spectator, Bonnie Blue good, Connor Tomlinson banned. Christianity, bad. Christianity, still bad. This was today. This was I can't tell if it's a hit piece or not. It was a write-up, a sort of sardonic eyebrow-raised write-up of Tommy Robinson's event in London on the 13th of December. I was off at a Christmas market with my wife, where a viewer ended up spotting me. So hello, if that was you. So I didn't attend this, but lots of people seemed to have done so, and it seems to be a wholesome gathering. It pissed off Nick Lowell, so clearly it did something right. But yet again, any coverage of Christianity in Unherd seems to be pushing the idea that there's a Christian nationalist far-right movement just on the fringes that is an ever-present threat over the horizon, that Reform, if they want to be the bulwark against the far-right, need to ostracize. And then, a couple of days prior, Giles Fraser, who is a progressive Anglican vicar, said Tommy Robinson is a cynical Christian. So he's not actually a Christian. We can denounce him, we can deny him 3 times. So Giles Fraser, I was at dinner with him, and Giles Fraser had said he thought mass migration from Muslim countries was encouraging because the number one enemy was secularism, and at least they believe in God and the book. Now, when I said which God, which book, there was a lot of stuttering and false prevarication. And a very famous American commentator who was also at the dinner, well, she gave him a verbal lashing. So that was a joy to watch. But this is the mentality. It's this sort of vague, abstract version of Christianity that believes that fundamentally everyone worships the same God deep down, we all want the same thing, and so the only form of Christianity that is legitimate, according to Unheard or represented by Reform, is one that fits neatly within the constraints of liberal pluralism. And, sorry, it's when you contrast that with, for example, their coverage of Muslims in Rakib Hassan's latest piece, it starts to seem vindictive. There is a pattern here. Bonnie Blue good, Tomlinson bad. Christianity bad, Islam good. And Rakib, look, I've spoken to Rakib privately multiple times. I won't disclose the contents of the conversation, but he's a good faith actor, even if I disagree with him, even if him and Harrison hate each other's guts. If you would like to see a discussion with myself and Rakib on demographics and migration and Islam, I'm sure we can sort something out next year. I only want to do sort of sit-down interviews and debates if it will move the conversation along. And there is one that I've proposed that we'll finish up with. But this is a piece that Unherd published, right? It's very, very critical of Rupert Lowe. It says, echoed across the country's cultural life, and indeed its birth rates, men like Hussein could soon shape life far beyond the internet with vast consequences for Muslims and non-Muslims alike. He's talking about Adnan Hussein, the independent Muslim MP. Judging by the recent data, the demographic trajectory of England will be increasingly shaped by Islamic social conservatism, and in truth, it's a relatively youthful population, talking about Muslims, one defined by its upward social mobility, and which is increasingly assertive across national life. Says, here's yet another irony. British Muslims have become so socially integrated and politically disillusioned that they're now mobilising along religious lines, electoral shifts which will be devastating for Labour in Muslim-dominant parts of the country. All this varied activity could transform British politics, particularly if backed by traditional ethnic minority habits that pool resources for community projects. Basically, if ethnocentrism applies to political organising, then Muslim candidates will be elected to represent explicitly Muslim interests. This is published in Unherd at the same time as reform's going too Christian. Christian nationalism is on the rise. Tommy Robinson isn't a real Christian. Are you seeing the pattern yet? Islam can represent itself in clannish fashion in British politics, and that's fine according to the doctrine of liberal pluralism. But any Christianity that doesn't accept the endorsement of Bonnie Blue, or encourage more Muslims to migrate to the country, is itself racist and fascist and should either be ostracised from reform or banned from being platformed on an OQS media platform like the Spectator. This is the line that they are taking. This is the line that is being pushed by all the media apparatuses that curry favour in SW1 for the traditional right-wing parties. So this is why it's very concerning that this, and look, this is much like the Yookay article, right? We can all acknowledge that Rakib's reading of the situation, that Islam is growing increasingly prominent thanks to demographics and unilateral liberal pluralism in British politics. We can all acknowledge this, and we can say whether it's a good or a bad thing. But this final line can read as a threat. I'm not saying that Rakib wrote it as a threat, but it can read as a threat. It certainly is by the sectarian Muslim enclaves that would like to see Britain turn into a caliphate. Whatever way you look at it, Britain is changing, and not necessarily in a direction Rupert Lowe will welcome. Unherd published this, but not my debate with Gove. Spectator published Bonnie Blue, but not my debate with Gove. That's because I think I substantively represented Reform's actual voter base, the dispossessed white English population who want to reclaim ownership of their own country and are unapologetic about not wanting to be governed by foreigners. Or, during these live streams, I am unapologetic about the fact that the sexual revolution has been an unmitigated disaster for young men and women, has broken up families, has given rise to the predatory porn industry, has spread STDs, increased abortions, caused all sorts of mental and physical health disorders that we could have done without. And that just doesn't fit neatly with the progressive social liberalism of the likes of Freddie Sayers. So I'm banned. And I just want to finish on this one post, because this is slightly aside. But following the Nick Fuentes controversy, when he appeared on Piers Morgan, when Danny Finkelstein zoomed in, and Nick Fuentes made some rather mean-spirited jokes. And if you type in me mum to Google, me mum died in the Holly is now the top search result. So it's undeniable Nick has a very engaged audience, and Danny is upset about this. But anyway, I was dragged into this conversation because I did a video that about 100,000 of you watched, and someone who follows me called Matt, doesn't even follow me. There we go. Well, okay, this is even more important, doesn't even follow me, isn't even a regular viewer, and thinks I had a good take. He says, I think Connor Tomlinson explains very well why Zoomers follow Fuentes and why having Finkelstein appear in the interview would have backfired. Watch Connor's explanation on YouTube, or if it's too long, just watch from 40 minutes when he mentions Danny. And Danny responded, Connor is a ludicrous individual. Now, Danny had watched my video on his dreadful article, There is no future in the politics of victimhood, before, and he wrote a really long tweet responding to me, which he then deleted, because you can find it on Google. I'll see if I can find it here. It comes up as a preview, but it doesn't... The link goes dead. No, I think it's been buried by recent results. Anyway, so it comes up as a preview, but it says this tweet no longer exists. So Danny just said, Connor is a ludicrous individual. You know, he's perfectly entitled to think so. But I responded with the following. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think this is the space in the Overton window that is increasingly shrinking that the likes of Unherd, thanks Freddie Sayers, occupies. It is this liberal pluralism that strains under the weight of its own contradictions, and it insists that they cannot be addressed. So I said, Danny, I say the following without any animosity. The way I see it, you have two options. You can either continue to insist on the unsustainable double standard that Israel gets to be a state that protects the ethnic Jewish people, while the UK, US, and Europe must be liberal, pluralistic, and multicultural. That Jews can collectively bargain, form advocacy groups, elect representatives, and petition for redress of their grievances, all normal and natural things that any political constituency and group should want, by the way. But if whites do the same, they're profiting from the politics of victimhood and just one goose step away from Auschwitz. You can keep expressing your horror at the ongoing and historic atrocities committed against Jews, like yesterday's Bondi Beach massacre, while supporting the migration policies which visit comparable horrors, like the Pakistani grooming gangs, on whites. You can continue to condemn and call for the censorship of provocateurs like Nick Fuentes while failing to understand how his audience organically dwarfs yours. Or you could reassess your priors, wonder if the state of affairs that your politics brought about, where whites and Jews are slaughtered in equal measure by men with no right to be here, is as desirable as you thought it would be, and enter into dialogue with interlocutors who were right about these problems when you weren't. The former position will just cause more people to hurl abuse at you, grow unsympathetic to the torture endured by your family, and become suspicious of Jewish people and their desire to protect themselves as a minority more broadly. This is a friendly warning. I gain nothing by giving you this warning. This is just how I see it. Take it or leave it. The latter might just help fix our country, cause a de-escalation in rhetoric, and end up with England enjoying all the things that you think Israel should have. You're a much more powerful person than I am. I'm half your age, and have grown up in a world where your politics of liberal pluralism have been ubiquitous. So ludicrous as I might be, I and all the young men who agree with me are just a byproduct of the Britain you helped create. If you actually want to understand why we think what we think, let's set the internet blood sports aside and chat. My DMs are open. So that invitation was sincere and remains open. As far as I know, Danny has not actually taken me up on my invitation and sent a DM request yet. I will just check as I'm speaking. But the reason I'm raising this is because Danny Finkelstein's under siege contradictory worldview is... He hasn't messaged me. Is the exact perspective shared by lots of people in Reform, by Unherd, by the Spectator, and it's not shared outside of SW1. It says that Israel gets to be basically nativist and ethnically protectionist, while England must be liberal, pluralistic, and multicultural. It says that we have to allow other faiths a position of prominence over our politics, but we must be quietist or ashamed of our own. It says that you can't organise as a political community when every other group can play identity politics and collectively bargain at your expense. Quite literally, the state redistributes your income in taxes to spend on their ethnic lobbying bodies. And I'm sorry, but that just won't last, because the further generations get from the inciting incident, mainly the Second World War, and the insistence that we must be open societies, otherwise we will walk ineluctably down the road to Dachau and Auschwitz. The further you get from that inciting incident, the less of a dead hand that moral burden rests on their conscience, and the less they have to lose by overturning that moral order by deliberately insulting you and being provocative. And I don't think I've done that, actually. I think I've just substantively critiqued that worldview. So, a few things to finish off this stream before I address the few super chats that have been sent in. Thank you for all those that have. Number one, reform just needs to reject the idea that it needs to make concessions to the antagonistic media and other parties that would rather see them capsize than succeed. Number two, there shouldn't be a single foreign national or person without any native ancestry in our politics. That means in the civil service, but also as elected councillors or MPs. Thirdly, you should not embrace the aesthetics or the morality of the UK. It's what people are voting against on an emotive level. This is why reform has Ozempic thin policy, but is dominating the polls. Because they're winning based on vibes. And the vibes are anti-UK. And so becoming the UK party by admitting its architects, or taking endorsements from prostitutes, or running Boris Wave migrants as candidates will be a disaster. It might not be an electoral disaster, though if you keep it up, it will be. It will be a liability. Over the course of 4 years. It took 4 years to build reform up. It can take 4 years to capsize them. But it certainly will be a disaster when you come to govern, because you won't have a moral North Star and you won't have the personnel in place to execute on the policies you want to push forward. And fourthly, Unherd. Who's it for? Freddie Sayers, probably. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'm just going to go to your super chats, so I'm just going to capsize the display capture. Good. So, super chats are, from JR for £5, is Reform too Christian? I don't know, Mr. Rubenstein. Is Likud too Jewish? I don't know, Mr. Hassan. Is the Bangladeshi Awami League too Muslim? I actually don't know how observant Rakib is as a Muslim. He says he is, but haven't pried. But it would be inconceivable to ask if the politics of a foreign country that has a state faith is too contaminated with that faith. You are correct. It would be absurd for me to go over and demand Israel be less Jewish. So therefore, it would be absurd for anyone, a guest in our lands, to demand that we be less Christian. Joe says, for $5, you should dump a bunch of curry in the channel, just like the Boston Tea Party. Dover Curry Party. I think the channel is contaminated enough with the discarded documents of foreign criminals. It also sounds like a scene from Camp of the Saints, so no thank you. $2 from Dreadnought Logan. Simple, not one more. You forgot my chat yesterday. I'm sorry if I did. I apologise if I skimmed over it. Leo Wolf the Red for $5. It looks like Reconquista's back on the menu, boys. Deus Volt. First the West, then Constantinople. Correct. Also Jerusalem. Like, the correct answer to Israel or Palestine is Christendom. Like, we should be retaking the Holy Land and ensuring that all of the Christian holy sites are not under Islamic occupation. Or that we should be able to visit them freely without being intimidated by Muslims who occupy them, even in Jewish-controlled Jerusalem. I've told the story about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre yesterday. Basically, a Muslim family controls the keys to one of the doors, and the other door is bricked up by Saladin. And there's a minaret that's slightly towering over it. James Loyal for £5 says, only anti-whites use anti-white slurs like racist to demonise anyone who isn't anti-white enough. If they call you racist, they're anti-white. It is shorthand at this point, because it never goes the other way around. And the point is, of course, not consistency, but just to wield power over you. Joe has sent in $5 with a message saying, hey Joe, thanks for the $5. You're my favourite subscriber. I love you. There you go. You can clip it. You can put it on a loop. You got a free Cameo, basically. I'm never signing up to Cameo. Blimey. Just embarrassing. James Loyal has also sent in a £5 super chat saying it's a promotion for the British Democrats Party. Never heard of them. So you're more than welcome to check out every political party on offer and make your own mind up as to whether or not they're electorally viable. That's not an endorsement. £5, Justice for the Win, says, Connor, what's your... Oh, this was the Reform having Muslim donors point before, so I already addressed that one. $20 from Theod Sienga, thank you for the super chat. I know it's Charlie's idea of articulating properly ordered identities framed around the covenants of the Bible, but what would you consider the modern version of Abraham's tribe to be? Extended family, regional identity? Something in the mix of those, yes. It's nebulous, but I would say it's the circle between your nuclearized family unit, which formed the foundation for English individualism. Read Alan McFarlane's work. And the broader loyalty to your national people. Because nation just means people. It means ethnicity, right? This is why I've actually been against the cleaving of civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. One, because people play fast and loose with ethnic nationalism to mean race, and therefore just deport everyone who isn't white. So I oppose that on the grounds of justice, because I'm an Aristotelian in that fashion. I think justice is each person getting what they're owed. And so we judge by content of character, not colour of skin. It just so happens that vast amounts of people from foreign nations have deficiencies in content of character and they need to go back. But also, it's an ideological division between nation and ethnicity. There is no ethno-nationalism, it's just nationalism. Like, the policies from there on out advocated by some ethno-nationalists, I might disagree with. But there's no reason to split between ethnic and civic nationalism. It makes no sense to talk about civic nationalism either, because values come from people. Culture comes from people. So you can't have the culture without the people, otherwise you're just in a cargo cult. So this is why when people have recently said, whoa, I didn't realise Connor's rhetoric got so based, it's like, no, you just misunderstood me. I was saying all the things that I believe to be true, but I just don't agree with the term ethno-nationalism, and I'm also not going to stand by every single person who uses the term because they just support policies that I disagree with. I'm not going to sit there and morally denounce them, or call them racist, and all sorts of other anti-white slurs, but I'm just not going to label myself something just because other people want me to label myself it. Like, peer pressure works in politics when people are status-seeking, because most politicians are obsessed about their public image, and whether or not being disliked will cut off opportunities to them in future. But I'm actually just too autistic to be pressured in that fashion, so I appreciate that you guys, not all of you guys, but some anons will try to do it. Unfortunately, it just hasn't worked. I've always believed what I've believed. $5 from Alex Roberts. Check up on Irving Kristol and the early neocons. They were Trotskyists. For as half the right-wing coalition under suspicion. Facts I can't unsee. This has been written about by Yoram Hazony and Conservatism and Rediscovery. The Fusionist Coalition. William F. Buckley made common cause with Frank Meyer, who was a Jewish liberal basically mugged by reality, who was still a liberal and cleaved off allies to their right, like the paleo-conservatives, but who took positions of prominence in conservatism and was very hawkish on foreign policy, but concessionary on social policies. So yeah, this is just the history of neoconservatism. And the final one, $20 Australian. Someone says, to correct myself from yesterday, turns out the guy who stopped the shooter was a rare Arab Christian who fled the Muslims, killing Christians in the Holy Land. His name was camouflaged to hide his religious affiliation. I can't speak to that. I've seen reports that he's Muslim. If he's an Arab Christian, excellent. I'm glad, because we're always happy for people to come to Christ and improve their lives. Whether or not he's a Muslim, though, doesn't change the fact that the shooters never needed to be there in the first place. And it turns out, as well, they're a Pakistani father and son. So, much like cousin marriage, they're keeping it in the family. Anyway, before I say things that could get me arrested, thank you all very much for watching. 2 hours. Wow. I did promise I was going to make this a short stream, but doesn't seem to be the case. Anyway, thank you all very much. I will be back on Wednesday to answer your questions, so make sure if you didn't send a super chat in today and you were saving it for Wednesday to think of something. When you do send in super chats, you don't have to, but I appreciate it because this is my livelihood. Make sure you say exactly what you want me to read out or address so that I'm providing value to you, because I'm very conscious of that. Otherwise, I'm going to go have dinner with my wife, who's probably frustrated that I've been talking to you so long. Until next time, everyone, take care, God bless, and goodbye.